For the first time since returning to the White House, President Biden addressed the United Nations Tuesday. The crux of his message to the global community was America's renewed commitment to the world. But the speech comes amid strained tensions between the U.S. and some of its closest allies. President Biden urged them to see his actions leaving Afghanistan and fighting the pandemic as charting a path forward.
Instead of continuing to fight the wars of the past, we are fixing our eyes on devoting our resources to the challenges that hold the keys to our collective future. Ending this pandemic, addressing the climate crisis, managing the shifts in global power dynamics, shaping the rules of the world on vital issues like trade, cyber, and emerging technologies, and facing the threat of terrorism as it stands today.
In Washington, the future of the Biden agenda remains in trouble. Democrats appear unable to get their caucus in line to pass the president's climate and social spending package. And they are failing to find Republican support for increasing the debt ceiling, even though they did so 3 times under President Trump. Raising the limit keeps the government running and prevents the U.S. from defaulting on its debt. Leaders from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI testified on everything from Afghanistan to the U.S.-Mexico border this morning. Things got heated when Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson pressed DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas for data on the number of migrants who have been detained, deported, and released into the U.S. over the last year.
How many people are being detained? How many people have been dispersed to all points around America?
Senator, I would be pleased to provide you with that data.
I want them now.
Senator, I do not have that data.
Why not?
For me.
Why don't you have that basic information?
Senator, I want to be accurate in the information.
I'm looking for ballpark figures.
CBS News' Michael George joins me now from New York City. So, Michael, President Biden's UN address sounded a little like his inaugural speech, an appeal for unity in a time of division. How did that and his message of America being, quote unquote, back seem to land?
Well, Elaine, he's speaking to world leaders who are very skeptical right now about America's leadership for a number of reasons. First off, we're coming out of 4 years of the previous administration's America First isolationist policy, a big contrast from President Biden's cooperation speech today. Also, we're having this conversation in the midst of tensions with China, with the UN Secretary General suggesting that there may even be a Cold War between the U.S. and China if things don't resolve between these two superpowers. And there's also a lot of talk about COVID and America's role in providing vaccines to the world. So there is a lot of skepticism meeting President Biden as he makes this speech, but he and the administration see this as just the first step in terms of presenting the new face of America, a face of cooperation with allies.
Well, Mr. Biden met with leaders from Australia and the UK this afternoon following the formation of a nuclear defense partnership. What is the White House doing to smooth things over with France, which recalled their ambassador over the deal?
Well, Elaine, that deal has been the source of controversy. It's led to a huge fight with France. Essentially, that nuclear deal with the UK and Australia led Australia to back out of a submarine deal with France. France was furious about this. It cost them about $65 billion. They've pulled their ambassador, and right now things are still very tense between the U.S. and France. The White House has said they're trying to arrange a call between President Biden and the French president to try and smooth things over. Today, the president was asked about our relationship with France. He said, quote, "It's great."
All right. Well, President Biden made a note of America not being engaged in the Afghanistan war for the first time in 20 years. The U.S. withdrawal was marked by some high-profile missteps. Did he give further details on America's future commitment there?
Well, in the president's speech, he didn't go into detail about all the chaos and the violence that we saw in the American exit from Afghanistan. What he did say is that this marks the end of a 20-year war. He said this marks also a turning point for the U.S. from relentless war to relentless diplomacy. He said the U.S. can now shift its resources to working with allies, to addressing other issues without focusing on this continued war on terror in Afghanistan. He did, of course, say that America will continue to protect its allies, protect itself from terror, but he tried to present the exit from Afghanistan as a positive for the world and for the U.S.
All right, Michael George reporting for us. Michael, thank you.
Thank you.
Alayna Treene and Liz Goodwin join me now with the latest from Washington. Alayna is a congressional reporter for Axios, and Liz is the Boston Globe's Washington bureau chief. Welcome to you both. Liz, let me start with you. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called on the White House to stop sending Haitian migrants back to Haiti, which is ill-equipped to receive them. The administration is dealing with a surge of some 12,000 migrants, many of them Haitian, gathering under a bridge under the U.S.-Mexico border. Can you give us a sense of what is actually happening to these migrants?
Yeah, so the Haitian migrants that are in Del Rio, Texas, it's a complicated situation because there's thousands of people who would like to seek asylum, and they're in a unique position where a lot of Haitians who've come over the border to seek that relief did not come straight from Haiti. They were in other parts of Latin America. They were living in Mexico, and now they are seeking asylum for reasons of, economic need in the countries they were essentially immigrants in. And so that's sort of what the Biden administration is saying in defending their decision to not even give these migrants an asylum hearing before they just send them back to Haiti, which is obviously very disruptive for the Haitians because a lot of them fled in 2010 after the earthquake, destroyed the economy, caused so much death and destruction, and they haven't lived there for years. And now the president there has been assassinated. There's all kinds of political turmoil. So a lot of Democrats have been pressing the Biden administration not to do deportations right now to such an unstable country. And while the Biden administration has expressed, regret or even horror at some of these images of Border Patrol agents appearing kind of aggressive towards these asylum seekers, they haven't really budged on the policy side. They have been pretty adamant that they can use this Trump-era policy of denying asylum hearings for any kind of migrant, and except for children. They did roll that part back, unaccompanied children, but adult migrants, they have stuck to this policy that they can just send them back without a hearing, and that doesn't appear to be changing.
All right, we'll continue to watch that. Meantime, Alayna, the House votes today on another short-term funding bill without dealing with the root problem. How is the fight over the debt ceiling putting some Republicans in a particularly difficult position?
Well, Elaine, I'd say it's putting actually both sides in a difficult position, and it really comes down to this fight about the debt limit. I mean, it's Mitch McConnell and Republicans have made clear multiple times now that they have no plans to support any sort of vote for raising the debt limit. And of course, that is not normal. It's normally a bipartisan exercise, and it's something that we saw Democrats help Republicans do throughout, I think it's 3 times throughout the Trump administration, to help them, pay our bills, deal with our debt, and potentially raise new spending. And this is something that we're going to see really drag out for the next few weeks. The House will pass it, just given that Democrats have the majority. So we're expected to see them pass that bill to fund the government. If they don't fund the government by September 30th, the government will shut down. But once it makes it to the Senate, that's where we're going to see it die. And there's almost, from just my conversations with Republicans on the Hill and Senate Republicans who are going to have a huge say here, it doesn't look like it's going to get the 10 votes that Democrats need to get this across the finish line. And so there's already a lot of talk about what a plan B might look like. Democratic leadership is trying not to, show any of their cards there or look like they have a plan B. But the most obvious and really only tool that they might have if Republicans refuse to join in on this is to do it via the partisan reconciliation process that they're currently going through to pass Joe Biden's $3.5 trillion spending package. And so it's very messy. It's going to continue to be very messy. And I think, the reason this really matters is we've never seen in U.S. history the country default on its debt. And so a lot of attention is being paid to this right now.
Let's dig into the messiness a little bit, Alayna. Progressive Democrats nixed some $1 billion in funding from Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system from the short-term funding bill. And you report, several are threatening to vote against the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So are internal divisions the biggest threat to Democrats' agenda?
In part. I wouldn't say they're the biggest threat. Republicans are very much, I think, considered Democrats' biggest threat. But the internal divisions and this infighting, mainly between the progressive wing of the party and the more centrist moderates in the party, is where we're seeing a lot of this play out. Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, has promised moderate Democrats that they could have a vote on the Senate-passed $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure deal by September 27th. And from all of my conversations with progressives, including Pramila Jayapal, the chairwoman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they think that they have the votes to sink it. And so it is a huge deal. And we saw this play out very clearly today, like you mentioned, Elaine, with the Iron Dome funding for that's supposed to be included in the government funding package. It looks like it's now going to be included as a separate bill, the defense spending bill that needs to pass for fiscal year 2022. But it's just the latest sign of how progressives and the more moderates in the party are really not seeing eye to eye on a lot of Biden's agenda.
Yeah, that's something that we continued to watch develop, because that's not a dynamic we necessarily obviously saw in the previous administration, at least not that openly in the way that it's showing itself now. Well, Liz, today Congressman Adam Schiff announced a proposal limiting presidential power. Here's more from the congressman.
The former president trampled many of our sacred norms and institutions, violating laws and breaking long-standing precedent with shocking ease. It demonstrated over the last 4 years just how vulnerable our democracy was, how dependent we are on norms of office and precedent that we thought were inviolate, that it turns out can be violated with impunity. That cannot happen again, no matter who is in power, whether it be a Democratic president or Republican president.
So, Liz, what would this legislation do, and will Republicans support it?
Yeah, Elaine, this legislation is very sweeping. Its proponents are comparing it to some of the reforms after the Watergate scandal. That's kind of the scope they're going for here. And it really spans things from making it harder for a president to evade congressional subpoenas, to making it harder for them to fire government watchdogs, retaliate against whistleblowers, financially benefit from personal businesses that could lead to political influence, pardon, political allies for inappropriate reasons. It's very comprehensive. What you mentioned about Republican support is the main X factor on this. It would need 10 Republican senators in the Senate to actually pass. It could not be a reconciliation type bill. There are some aspects of this bill that have been supported by Republicans in the past. Some of the aspects around not letting presidents influence the DOJ, things like that. And so the strategy so far, according to Democrats, is to try to kind of break it up in the Senate and maybe attach some of the pieces that Republicans would support to other bills. So to be seen if that ends up working, but probably this giant sweeping package would not get that Republican support.
All right, well, Liz, former President Trump is holding a rally this Saturday in Georgia. That's a state where both of the previous Senate candidates he backed lost to Democrats. What and who is on the agenda for Saturday's meeting?
Yeah, so as you know, President Trump has been on a bit of a revenge mission in Georgia ever since he lost it last November. He's the first Republican to lose it since 1992. And he's really been targeting a lot of his ire at some of the officials who did not go along with his false claims of fraud. They did not show an interest in furthering his claims that he lost the state because of fraud. And so two of the people at this rally will be challenging those officials, the Secretary of State and the Lieutenant Governor. So that's sort of setting up the potential for an ugly kind of primary in the state and in two statewide races, which Republicans have kind of mixed feelings about, obviously. But the headliner is Herschel Walker, who is Trump's pick to challenge Raphael Warnock for the Senate seat there. He is famous former football player, Cowboys player, really well known in the state. So in that way, an attractive candidate, but in other ways, more establishment Republicans have a lot of concerns about him. The AP sort of dug up some allegations from his ex-wife and a restraining order. There's also a lot of questions about his chicken business, which he has apparently exaggerated the size of in the past. So there's a lot of trepidation in Georgia that Trump's influence could sort of do a repeat of 2020 and scramble the field. And obviously that was not a great year for them. They lost two Senate seats and the presidency. But the president is very focused on Georgia, and he obviously has the ears of the primary electorate and will be very influential in that primary.
Right. The campaign continues. Alayna Treene and Liz Goodwin, thank you both very much.